You're listening to The Secrets of Star Trek, where we discuss the hidden layers and deeper meanings found in all the Star Trek TV series, movies, and more. And today we're discussing the latest episode of Lower Decks called Crisis Point 2, Paradoxus. I'm Tom Bettinelli, and joining me today on the panel are Jimmy Akin. Hey, Jimmy.
Howdy, Dom. And
Father Cory Sticha. Hey, Father Cory.
So are you going to put an echo effect over the title?
I should. We'll see. So, folks, be sure to like The Secrets of Star Trek on our Facebook page, facebook.com/StarQuestMedia. You can retweet us on Twitter, where we're at SQPN. Find us on Instagram at StarQuest Network, and be sure to leave comments wherever you find us. We love to hear from you. I want to tell you about another show on the StarQuest Network you're sure to enjoy called The Catholics of Oz. You can find that wherever fine podcasts are found, or at sqpn.com/OZ, or as they like to say, OZ. Anyway, let's talk about Crisis Point 2. Jimmy, can you give us a recap of what happens in this episode?
This week we get a sequel to the first season episode, Crisis Point. Crisis Point, The Rise of Vindicta was a holonovel or holodeck movie invented by Boimler but finished by Mariner. And now Boimler has come up with a sequel called Crisis Point Paradoxus. The story involves Romulans stealing an experimental device from the Cerritos called the chronogami, which lets you fold time and thus travel in it. The Romulans plan to go back in time and stop the Federation from existing, but the story goes sideways when Boimler gets called to a meeting with Commander Ransom, and when he returns, he's depressed and isn't into the story. He decides to bail on the main plot, so he appoints Tendi acting captain, and she and Rutherford go off to defeat the Romulans. Meanwhile, he wants to go in search of a godlike being called Kitiha to get wisdom and learn the meaning of life. Mariner is frustrated with this, and she ends up bailing on Boimler. She meets with Ransom outside the holodeck and learns from him that Boimler's transporter clone on the Titan, William Boimler, has unexpectedly died, and it bummed Boimler out. Mariner returns to help him get back on his feet emotionally. They find Kitiha, who turns out to be only able to dispense cheesy inspirational quotes rather than real godly wisdom. In view of his transporter clone's death, Boimler gets angry when he can't be told the meaning of life, and he attacks Kitiha. This leads to him learning that Kitiha is really an upgraded version of the Wright brothers flyer from Kitty Hawk, North Carolina, which Boimler declares is a meaningless revelation that makes no sense. Meanwhile, Tendi is getting progressively more frustrated with Rutherford, who is not taking their mission to defeat the Romulans seriously and just having fun. She admits, for the first time, that she'd really like to be a captain, and Rutherford's lack of seriousness makes her feel worthless as a captain. But Rutherford says he'd love to have her as his captain, and with renewed confidence, she uses the chronogami to travel back to when the Romulans stole the device so that they can steal it back. Romulans defeated for the win. Meanwhile, Boimler has been injured and become clinically dead. He has a vision of being at Captain Kirk's farm in Idaho, but instead of meeting Captain Kirk, he meets Captain Sulu, who helps him realize that if you spend all your life worrying about having a meaningless death, you'll never have a meaningful life. With this realization, he's brought back to life in sickbay, and we finish in an undisclosed star system where we see a Defiant-class starship. On board the starship, the transporter clone William Boimler is being brought back to life, and we learn that his death was staged so that he could join the secretive organization, Section 31. Dum-dum-dum.
The end, yes. So, yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, I love that ending because they played it so perfectly where it's like, I'm glad it wasn't cliffhanger. I hate cliffhangers.
Yeah. Yes.
And then you have a cliffhanger.
Yeah. So this is, well, I want to start by saying, for me, this is just like with some previous episodes. Whenever Lower Decks has an episode that I don't quite prefer, it's almost always followed up by one that I feel is really good. And that's what makes, to me, Lower Decks such a great series is even when there's stuff that isn't as good, there's always something good coming up. And I think this was a really great episode of Lower Decks. I don't know how you guys feel about that.
Oh yeah, it was fun. I didn't mind the previous episode, but I enjoyed this one.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Yeah, no, this was a lot of fun. There's a lot of nice little Easter eggs and a lot of little, things to kind of watch for as you're going through it, and we'll talk about some of that. But
they like stuffed almost every previous Star Trek movie into this.
So, I was going to say, yeah.
So from Star Trek 1, we have, instead of Voyager becoming V'ger, we have the Kitty Hawk Flyer becoming Kitty Haw. From Star Trek 2, we have the opening kind of rainbow credits, which they adapt and use the same font for the credits of this. Star Trek 3, I don't recall.
Oh, the torpedo tube where William Boimler is in it. Yeah.
But that wasn't in the holodeck plot.
Right.
Right. I was thinking in the holodeck movie.
Okay.
It's callbacks to all these previous movies. In Star Trek 4, The Search for Whales, we have the go back in time to get a squid. That's the save a squid. That's the ancestor of a famous Federation ambassador.
Yeah.
Star Trek 5, instead of searching for a godlike being, Shaka Ray, we're going, or on Shaka Ray or whatever it is, we're going to find the godlike being Kitty Ha.
Yeah.
Star Trek 6. I don't recall one from Star Trek 6 off the top of my head. Star Trek 7, Generations. We have the meeting with Captain Kirk at his farm in the boonies,
right, which is also not in the holodeck plot. So I think that maybe works with the Star Trek 3 thing as well, because he was. Well,
it's it's kind of blended. I mean, I think it's ambiguous.
Yeah.
Then Star Trek 8, the First Contact, we have go back in time to stop the Federation from existing.
Yeah.
Star Trek Insurrection, that's Star Trek 9. I don't really remember anything from that. And then Star Trek 10, Nemesis. You have the Romulan bomb that both blows up the Romulan Senate in Nemesis, and that's used by the Romulans in Crisis Point Paradoxus. So they went through the catalog of there's also
reference
J.J.
to
Abrams.
Yeah, where Mariner says that's a stupid plot. Who would ever believe that sort of plot? Which she basically leaves out the Kelvin one, where we're played by younger, different versions of ourselves.
Yeah, right.
Well, and then there's meta stuff where the colors were a little more subdued, like older films are. And one point when Mariner's leaving the holodeck, she actually has to step over the black bar.
Yes,
at the bottom of the screen.
Well, that's actually the episode in the holodeck stuff is presented in the wider 2.39 by 1 aspect ratio movies, but that's only when they're on the holodeck, and otherwise it's 16 by 9 real world. We also have film grain added to the Crisis Point holodeck sequences, and there's even a Q mark at one point, which is like that dot that sometimes appears on film.
Yeah,
I missed it.
That's the cue to the film projector guy to get the next reel ready. So it's kind of fun.
When I was at seminary, at Mundelein, they actually had the old school 35 millimeter projectors that they'd upgraded.
Oh yeah,
and we would show movies for family days and stuff. So we'd actually rent Cars or something like that, a cartoon for kids. And I ran the theaters, and you see that mark. The first time you see the mark, you turn on the second projector. The second time you see the mark, you hit the button to switch projectors.
Right.
And so I missed that. I should have caught that. That's funny.
Well, it goes by really quick.
Yeah. So
another kind of thing that they take, in addition to rampaging through the back catalog of Star Trek films for references in this.
Yes.
We also have these Romulan triplets, the Melpinar sisters, who are a Romulan equivalent of the Duras sisters, Lursa and Bator, who also were in both Next Gen and the Star Trek movies.
Right down to the costume design, because I say this delicately, in the design for the Duras sisters, their costumes emphasized the bosom in a particular way, and these ones did too. I noticed, being a guy, that's the sort of thing I guess you notice. Also, another reference to a movie thing that never actually happened, which is the Mariner references a time travel plot involving the assassination of John F. Kennedy.
Yeah.
That was the scrapped plot of the initial sequel to Wrath of Khan. They were going to actually do a different thing than Search for Spock.
Oh, and Gene Roddenberry was obsessed with that plot of the original Enterprise crew goes to 1963 and does the Kennedy assassination. I mean, is present at the Kennedy assassination. And everyone was like, Gene, come on. Kennedy has to die. The audience is going to know that from the beginning. So if you're going to try to save Kennedy, the audience is going to know you're going to fail.
That's right.
And if you do the reverse, if you have like the Klingons are here to save Kennedy and rewrite history, you're going to have to kill him.
Yeah.
Either way, this is not City on the Edge of Forever, where the drama comes from the fact Kirk doesn't know that Edith Keeler has to die until he's already fallen in love with her.
Yeah.
But if it's John F. Kennedy, everyone knows this man is going to die by the end of the film.
Right. That the plot was the Klingons are going to save Kennedy, which would change all of the future of the Federation, all that sort of stuff, the usual thing. And so the Enterprise crew would have had to have let Kennedy die. But like you said, we know he dies. So, I don't know. Yeah. And maybe it would have been Kirk pulling the trigger instead of Oswald, or he would have been the man on the grassy knoll, maybe. Knoll.
Yeah. And then he beams out.
Yes, that's how it worked. So this chronogami is the MacGuffin that they're trying to get, which is the equivalent of the Genesis device from Wrath of Khan, and it can cancel any point in history, and that's where Mariner mocks the idea of the Kelvin trek.
I love how they have Captain Freeman or Hollow Captain Freeman over-explain what the chronogami is. Yeah. Chrono from time, gami from origami, which is folded paper, so it folds time, and blah, blah, blah. And then she's got several words in the same sentence that all have chrono on them. Yeah. And Mariner says, whoa, I mean, that's really, you really want to avoid that many made up words in a row.
So they end up having to go to the scientific station that looks a lot like the one in Wrath of Khan with the Genesis City Alpha, not City Alpha. I forget the name of it. Doesn't matter. They go to the place, and there's a Carol Marcus analog there who's supposed to be the romantic interest for Boimler's character,
Captain Bucephalus Dagger, which is an amazing name.
Yes,
it is.
Not just because it's got dagger in it, but because it's got Bucephalus in it. For people who may not be aware, Bucephalus was the horse of Alexander the Great. It was his favorite horse, and so he just doted on Bucephalus. Bucephalus was like a war hero, and Alexander the Great, of course, is this great conqueror. You then later in 3 centuries later, or 3.5 centuries later in Roman times, you've got Caligula, who fancies himself a great conqueror. He conquered Neptune and took spoils of Neptune, meaning seashells off the beach, and had his soldiers attack the water. But his horse was Incitatus, and he at least joked about making Incitatus a senator. And so it's like, okay, you got Bucephalus and Incitatus and I guess Seabiscuit, and they're like the 3 most famous horses in history.
There you go. The other thing I noticed, by the way, we just talked about like how the differences between the real world of Lower Decks and the holodeck movie version. All of the space sequences of the holodeck program were super high detailed resolution computer graphics. I don't know if you noticed that. Like all the starships were very realistic as opposed to the normal animation of Lower Decks, which I thought was a funny turnabout so that was pretty good.
Although they did have like wireframe, animations of starships in the holodeck in history, and Rutherford is like geeking out over the wireframes. I can't believe these graphics.
Yes. Yeah, because it was recalled again that video that they watched in Wrath of Khan explaining the Genesis device.
Wireframe.
Yeah. That's funny. So they go to the alien planet of Tatasciore, which happens to be the name of the actor who plays Shax. So they named it
Yeah.
after Fred Tatasciore, which I have no idea if that's how you actually pronounce it, but that's what it looks like to me. And it's a primitive planet, or per se, and the hawkers are yelling out, like they're walking through a marketplace, and so people are yelling out phrases like, "We're all holograms in a program," and "The koala smiles on us all," which is a great reference to the koala that you see at the moment of death, which we've gotten several times now. So those were fun, and this is about the point where Boimler goes off on his side quest, because he's already been. You had to leave the holodeck and come back for his talk with Ransom, and he's going to follow this side plot from a random extra who Mariner keeps pointing out. All of these extras are just generated on the fly, but from the holodeck computer. Like everything that happens here is just random nonsense that the holodeck is making up.
It's just set dressing or color.
Yeah.
As they would say in role playing, they're NPCs, non-player characters.
Exactly. Yeah.
Well, they're low level NPCs. They're not even the main villains.
Exactly.
Right. But because one of them offered, the answer to the meaning of life, and now that we know what Boimler's news was, he wants, what is the meaning of life? So he puts Tendi in charge of the main plot.
So they can go to the third moon of Shatnari.
Yes, nice.
Named after William Shatnari.
Right.
That little lesser known actor,
And they travel in time to the Great Slime Crisis.
Oh, this is great. I love this. So the Great Slime Crisis is set in 2341, and so that's a little bit, it's like 20 years or a little more than 20 years before the original series, 10 years or so before Strange New Worlds. And there's this Earth Ambassador Koro, who is a squid, that learns how he resolves the crisis by learning how to read the slime hive mind, and solves this great crisis that Hollow Captain Freeman tells us every kid learns about in school. So I love this great previously unmentioned pivotal Federation crisis that everybody knows about, that involved a slime hive mind that was contacted by a squid ambassador. I think that's awesome.
I want live action Trek to now make this a serious thing at some point, like to create a serious plot line that involves the Great Slime Crisis of 2341.
Or at least a Lower Decks episode where we get to see the whole slime crisis.
Well, true. And Ambassador Koro, the squid ambassador. So, so Mariner is mad at Boimler, right? She thinks that Boimler's ruining what she calls the Vindicta-verse, because Vindicta was her character that she played in Crisis Point 1, the main villain that hijacked the plot of that and turned it into something else. But Boimler says he's created art from her sad tantrum that was an excuse to murder the crew. That's how he described Crisis Point 1. So they have this disruption, and she leaves there, and that's when she goes to Ransom and he tells her, because she has a performance review that she's supposed to go to, and that's when he tells her about Boimler's transporter clone on the Titan dying, and that's another plot from season 1, I think, as well. That was season 1.
He gets assigned to the Titan at the end of season 1, and at the beginning of season 2, in episode 1, he gets a transporter clone and comes back.
Right.
Okay, yeah.
That's how Boimler ended up back on the Cerritos, was this transporter clone stayed on the Titan.
Right, and took the name William to honor Will Riker, and it was cooler in all ways than Brad Boimler, which is the irony. Meanwhile, in the main plot of Crisis Point 2, Tendi and company have time traveled to Sydney, 1982, which is one of the reasons why I love that we were talking about Catholics of Oz earlier, where they're mugged by Australian punks until Shax takes them out Terminator style, which
again, very Wrath of Khan.
Yeah, yes, that's true. Yeah, it's, instead of the punk on the bus, it's street punks.
That'd be Search for Whales was the punk on the bus.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Right.
Yes, I'm sorry. Yes, it's for with that, and also the time travel to the 1980s.
Right, exactly. Meanwhile, Boimler's movie is falling apart. And he reveals when Mariner goes back, she finds out his devotees that he's been following to go find Kitiha have turned on him, thrown him in the brig, and he's depressed and talks about how his clone, who's an exact copy, died for no reason. Like it was just a random death. And it makes Boimler question his existence and whether life even matters if you could just die randomly like this. And people do go through crises like this when random death occurs.
Absolutely.
And it's kind of interesting to have such a heavy thing in the middle of this comedic animated show.
Well, and they frequently will for Lower Decks. You know, they have emotional depth to these characters. They're not all comedy. And also people can do things like what Mariner or what Boimler then does next, because one of the people who betrayed him is this guy with enormous amounts of skin that has tattoos with a map on his skin. Yeah. And so Boimler and Mariner go to confront the guy, and Mariner is thinking we can do diplomacy with this guy to figure out what we need to do next. And Boimler just starts punching him relentlessly. And Mariner's like, oh, yeah, we can do the Kirk thing, too. That works, too.
Yes. And they have this like little character, this Igor-like character called Nick. I keep getting his name wrong. And then he like throws off the robe, and he's revealed to be this huge buff alien of some sort that goes to town on the others. And then that the one that Boimler takes down has like these enormous folds of skin, like he had been like an enormously fat man who lost a lot of weight or something like that.
And the thing is, actually, well, if you lose the weight by fasting, the skin will shrink because your body, how fasting works is autophagy. You know, your body is eating itself. It eats the insides the fat cells, and then your body's looking around for what else is useless here that we can eat. Oh, how about all this extra skin we don't need anymore?
Yep.
And I've experienced this myself because, you know, I used to weigh 320 pounds or so, and I now weigh around, I lost like currently I'm down by 120 pounds on that. I'm around 200. And I read, warnings from people saying, oh, you're going to have all this extra skin. You're going to have a tummy tuck and things like that. But I read on the intermittent fasting sites, from the doctors who specialize in this, they said, no, I've never had my patients have that problem. And it's true. It took like a year or so, but my skin shrank. And so if you lose the weight by intermittent fasting, your body will get rid of it. You actually won't have that problem, at least not in the long term. But for comedic purposes, it turns out that the reason they had trouble finding the right location for Kitiha is the guy's skin is like one of those fold together Mad Magazine things where you've got to shove together two folds of skin to get the right map.
Yeah.
So at one point, I have the line written down, and I forget who gives it, whether it's Mariner and Boimler or Tendi and Rutherford, but they're both kind of struggling with taking this seriously, taking this movie. I think it's actually Mariner to Boimler. Like Boimler's disappointed in how things have turned out in his story, his movie that he wrote, his holodeck movie, and Mariner says to him, it's an uneven slog that totally ignores the successes of the original. Speaking of Crisis Point 2. But it's also a Starfleet movie, which means it's worth doing. And I love the meta, no matter how bad a Star Trek movie is, it's still Star Trek, and it's always worth seeing and making and that sort of thing. So I kind of enjoy that.
Is it, though? I still have not made it all the way through Simon Pegg's third J.J. Abrams movie.
The Star Trek Back and Beyond or whatever it was.
Yeah. Star Trek Bed Bath and Beyond, haven't gotten all the way through that.
I've seen it once. I have not seen it twice, but I may see it again.
We'll talk about it maybe eventually. Maybe.
We will get to it. We will get to that one. Yeah.
Maybe that'll be an April Fool's episode.
I'll definitely watch the whole thing when we cover it, but I haven't been motivated to finish it on my own.
So, as we mentioned, Tendi has been taking this movie very seriously, playing the role very seriously, and Rutherford has been treating it like a joke. And like when they're just diffusing this Romulan bomb, he's like, well, whatever, but he's like kind of flinging things out of the components out of it left and right, and not really worried if it explodes or not. And she reveals.
We also get a glimpse, because they take the bomb to the founding of the Federation, and we get a glimpse of that same set in animated form from the end of Star Trek Enterprise.
Right, that's right. I was wondering if they would show like Riker and Troy in the background somewhere.
Oh, I would want to see Archer and T'Pol.
Yeah. Or both. That would have been awesome to have them both present in the background somewhere. That would have been a great Easter egg. But Tendi, kind of reveals to Rutherford, like, the reason she's taking it so seriously is she actually has ambitions to become an actual Starfleet captain, something that Rutherford didn't know about her, even though she's a science officer now.
Well, and she says, once she says it, she says, oh, I've never said that out loud before.
Right. And she comes up with the clever idea to solve the plot of taking the chronogami back to the beginning of the movie, and swapping out the chronogami for a bomb.
And thus satisfying every sci-fi fan who has ever watched a time travel movie and said, why don't you go back to the beginning and redo the problem?
Well, it's the Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure solution, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Exactly.
Ted, remember to come back here from the future and place a gun right here behind this box. Excellent. He finds the gun. So, meanwhile, Boimler and Mariner on their way to as we mentioned, the third moon of Shatnari, and they find the Oracle of Truth, called Kitty Ha, and Boimler asks, "What's the meaning, of William Boimler's death?"
Well, he says, "What is the purpose of life?" And Kitty Ha says, "The purpose of life is a life of purpose." Okay, but what about what I was asking? Love without trust is a river without water. Yeah, these are just inspirational quotes. And Mariner says, there's always a catch with these God stories. Hanging a lantern on it. Yes, there is in Star Trek.
Yes.
There's always a catch with these God stories. The holodeck just made up a cheesy quote generator.
Right. Yeah. Life is like a cup of tea. It's all in how you steep the water, was the other one. So, it turns out that Kitty Hawk is a construct built around the Wright Flyer from Kitty Hawk, North Carolina, for some reason. And that drives Boimler a little nuts, and he breaks his way inside.
He says, that reveal doesn't make any sense. My movie is trash. It doesn't have a deeper meaning.
Yeah. Right. Star Trek V. And he ends up on Kirk. He kind of passes out, ends up on Kirk's ranch from Star Trek Generations. And that's where we find Captain Sulu, played by George Takei, actually does the voice.
Yep. Yeah. I love the intro, because Sulu has his back turned. He's in the barn. He's feeding a horse. And he's got his back turned, or he's doing something with a horse, maybe shoeing it or something.
Grooming it.
Yeah, grooming it. Yeah, he's grooming it. That's what it was. And he's got his back, and Boimler comes in the front door, sees him from behind, and says, Captain Kirk? And it's like, oh my, no, I'm Captain Sulu.
You can't have George Takei without getting an oh my. That was kind of fun. And his advice to Boimler in this case is, the randomness of death is a reflection of the unexpected joys we find in life. What do you think of this little aphorism here that we have here? Is it profound, or just another quote generator nonsense?
Quote generator.
I mean,
deep thoughts with Jack Handy. No.
Yeah, I was thinking the deep thoughts. The holodeck computer got a hold of a copy of that, he's woken up where he feels like the horse is biting him.
We gotta explain that. So he's Captain Sulu is working with this horse,
right?
And at one point in the conversation, he says to Boimler, "Would you like to feed the horsey?" And he gives him like a bucket of oats, and Boimler feeds the horse. And then as after he's got enough of a sense of things that, okay, I shouldn't worry about having a meaningless death, or I'll never have a meaningful life. Yeah. He thanks Captain Sulu, and then says, by the way, and he's got this ton of technical questions about like, including like, what was it like to punch the crystal keys on the original Enterprise? and he's doing the fanboy thing, and Sulu says, the horsey's going to bite you now, and it then lunges for Boimler's neck and starts biting him on the neck, at which point he wakes up in sickbay.
Yes, and it's Tahana hitting him with a hyperspray, I think it was. So, and he was technically clinically dead. So, and then we have...
And apparently because of how long they were in the holodeck, because Tahana says... holodeck stories may be fake, but dehydration is not. Take a break every now and then.
right. You gotta hydrate even on the holodeck, and hollow water doesn't count. So as they leave,
might
if it's making actual replicating water. That's true. In the corridor outside sickbay, they talk about how much fun they had, and Marinette tells Boimler it was a good sequel to her story after all, thanking him for not ending it with a cliffhanger because, as like Father Cory mentioned, she likes happy endings, and Boimler agrees cliffhangers are the worst. At which point we get the beginning of the credits and then the cliffhanger where we have in an undisclosed or redacted location, I think it was.
System redacted.
Yes. We have as you mentioned, Defiant class starship where we have a torpedo tube that opens. William Boimler is revived. His death was faked so he could join Section 31 because, of course, although he's given a black comm badge, and he makes a funny observation about it. Which is
what Lower Decks does great, is hang lanterns on absurd things. He says, so if we're a super secret organization, why are we given comm badges that advertise that fact? And the woman who resurrected him says, you could go back to being dead. And he says, oh no, and he puts on the comm badge and starts cackling evilly to show her he's on board with being in Section 31.
Yes, and that's the end. So any other thoughts about this episode, Father Cory?
No, I enjoy this. The one thing I would like to correct, Jimmy, you said that the Great Slime event happened in 2341, and then you said it was before Strange New Worlds. 2341 is between TOS and DS9 and TNG. 2341 is when Data entered Starfleet Academy. This is according to Memory Alpha. Data entered Starfleet Academy, and both Jadzia and Julian Bashir were born in 2341.
Yeah, you're right. I had my century wrong. I'm always confusing the 2200s with the 2300s. Yeah, 2200s is original series, 2300s is next gen.
Right. Yeah. So because everybody was wearing the movie TOS movie uniforms, as they were walking through the slime.
Right. So. It's always tough keeping track of those years when you're a Time Lord, right, Jimmy?
Minor correction, but just because we'll get feedback. We want feedback.
Well, There's nothing you can do to prevent the catharsis of spurious morality.
So
that's all I got. So,
Jimmy, any final thoughts then?
So we've got a number of recent cliffhangers. We had Peanut Hamper being confined to the megalomaniacal robot storage unit and beginning to make sinister plans with Agimus.
Yeah.
We had Rutherford's secret program that he was part of, that he had his mind wiped from, and that was headed by senior Starfleet officers who are nameless and shadowy. And now we have Boimler's transporter clone being inducted into Section 31. I'm wondering how much of this gets paid off this season versus how much they want to pay off in the future. But we've got quite a number of ominous, revelations or in play that, between Rutherford's backstory and Boimler's transporter clone, we have ominous revelations in those cases, and we have further sinister plotting with Peanut Hamper.
Yeah. I feel like the Rutherford situation feels like a Section 31 thing where they might be setting up a situation. That's the sort of thing they would do. So those might be related.
Yeah,
I wonder if
that was conducting illegal joyrides in the neutral zone with the Romulans.
Right.
Or in the Romulan neutral zone.
Assuming that the Peanut Hamper and Agimus thing is not just, megamaniacal computers doing megamaniacal things and really don't go anywhere, I think that might be another episode for another season.
Yeah.
That one could just carry over.
That's my suspicion. Yeah, they may not do anything with it. If they do, I suspect that one will be in the future. But we, at a minimum, I think we need some payoff in view of the advertising for this season. We need payoff on Rutherford's plot and possibly on the transporter clone as well.
And see, I kind of agree with Dom that I think the two are related.
Those two.
Section 30 is through the transporter clone that we'll find out what Section 31 was doing with Rutherford.
I think Section 31 is ripe for comedic treatment. I just think there's a lot there that could be really funny. So we've got 2 episodes left of this season. So, it's possible. We'll see. I haven't seen a title for the next episode yet. They usually drops by now, but I haven't seen it. So we'll have to see.
Section 31 is, even historically, from its origin, it had comedic elements, because when it's first introduced, we don't even know what it is, but we know Julian in Deep Space Nine is being put on trial effectively. And we later learn it's a test to see if he's worth inviting into Section 31. But we have comedy in that episode, like where he orders scones for breakfast and they bring him gach,
right,
and stuff like that. And then, you have the original Section 31 agent, Sloan, is great. I mean, he is awesome. He is suave and reasonable and sinister and very polite. And in the episode where he dies, what they're doing is they've gone in, O'Brien and Julian have gone into his mind because he's dying. He's triggered an implant to cause himself to die so that they can't torture out of him the antidote to the founder plague. And so he's triggered like a brain aneurysm in himself, and they go into his mind to retrieve the information before he dies. And he's there, and he's just so welcoming and everything, and he takes them into the wardroom because they're picturing his mind as if it's Deep Space Nine. And he's got a party there with all of his friends from his real life who are saying goodbye to him now that he's dying. And he's got his wife and I think one of his kids and he's just Mr. Hospitality. And the wife's talking about how horrible it was being married to him. And it's, there's a lot of comedy there.
Yeah. William Sadler, great actor. Is in many movies, TV shows,
and other things. Yeah. So something to look forward to. So I'm looking forward to that. There is going to be a season 4 of Lower Decks that's already been announced. There needs to be. I mean, Lower Decks really can virtually go on indefinitely.
Oh yeah. I mean, The Simpsons has proved that 30 plus years you can do, maybe not 30 years, but you could do many years of Lower Decks. All right, so we'd like to take a moment to thank our patrons who make it possible for us to create The Secrets of Star Trek, including Laura F., Benjamin B., Kathleen F., Tom L., and Daniel D. Their generous donations at sqpn.com/give make it possible for us to continue The Secrets of Star Trek and all the shows at StarQuest, and you can join them by visiting sqpn.com/give. This StarQuest show is also brought to you in part by Jacqueline Brown, the best-selling author of The Light series. Check out her new release, Altered, on Amazon or any fine bookstore. Learn more about her and her work at sqpn.com/brown. So we'd love to hear what you thought of Crisis Point 2 Paradoxus. You can let us know by commenting on the show at sqpn.com/trek, our Facebook page at facebook.com/StarQuestMedia, or send an email to trek@sqpn.com, or visit our Discord community at sqpn.com/discord. We'll be back next time when we'll be discussing the next new episode of Lower Decks, and until then, Father Cory Sticha, thank you for joining me and sharing The Secrets of Star Trek.
Thank you, Dom.
Jimmy Akin, thank you as well.
Thanks, and live long and prosper.
And once again, I'm Dom Bettinelli. Thank you for listening to The Secrets of Star Trek on StarQuest, and remember, the koala smiles on us all.